What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Today's episode, like many others, was first before this episode in the Patreon chat. If you don't know, several of the patrons get together on a daily basis, talk to me, talk to each other, help each other out. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Anyway, today's discussion came out of that. You may be familiar with the scout rifle concept. That kind of concept pioneered and thought of by Colonel Jeff Cooper. In fact, the very first episode on Gunfighter Life was called Scout Rifle or Scout Rifles, or The Scout Rifle. That I believe was the very first episode. Well, today, what about a scout pistol? A scout handgun. What would that even be? What would the parameters be? What would that look like? Well, that's what we're going to discuss today. So if that interests you, hopefully you'll stay tuned. If you like this content, you want more, goodshepherdtraining.com. Who am I? A question we should all ask ourselves. I am, first and foremost, a servant of God, made in His very own image, a follower of Jesus Christ, a simple man called by God to the Great Commission to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Next, a little bit about my background and what God has allowed me to do and blessed me to do in life. Grew up what most would consider very poor in the backwoods of the southeastern and mid-Atlantic United States, hunting and fishing. Joined the Marine Corps at 17. Did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. So a decorated Marine Corps combat veteran. Infantry assaultman. After the combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also a veteran of law enforcement. I served with LAPD. I was a sworn peace officer, a cop for LAPD. I worked regular patrol assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those more specialized assignments was warrant service, fugitive recovery. Also had some other law enforcement roles. I am an FBI certified firearms instructor and been certified by another 3-letter government agency in a lot of firearms and training things. I've also been a private contractor, worked in the private sector, pertaining to tactics and gunfighting and protecting America from enemies foreign and domestic. I served as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters in a large metropolitan area. That was our primary mission, to stop active shooters, which sadly are a thing in America today. I've also been blessed to do quite a bit of competition shooting. Started my first formal competitions even before joining the Marine Corps at 17. I had won more shooting competitions than I can remember. I have competed in all manner of disciplines in shooting. I've been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion, West Coast regional champion. Like I said, been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. Mentioned hunting. I've hunted to put meat on the table, starting when I was a child. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunting and slaying all manner of beast. And I don't apologize for that. Humbled to be the host of 3 podcasts. Simple Man Sermons, Alpha Male Podcast, and Gunfighter Life. Obviously, as things not mentioned, I've been blessed to do many other things. But, again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a believer and follower of the Bible, the Word, Jesus Christ. And I don't apologize for that. With that, let's transition into today's topic. So, the Scout handgun. Now, I'm going to start this with a caveat, because I do try and give honor where honor is due and respect where respect is due. And a lot of the things we have today are some form or fashion traced back to Jeff Cooper in the shooting world. If you've ever heard of that game, I guess you would call it, 6 Degrees to Kevin Bacon, a lot of things you could get like 2 degrees to Jeff Cooper, like the modern firearm safety rules or color codes of awareness, and so many things are just kind of part of the gun culture today. And a lot of the newer gun culture may not even know that Jeff Cooper, I don't know if he came up with, because obviously people were practicing safety rules before that, but he kind of culminated them together in a coherent set, and so many other things. Anyway, he had this idea of the scout rifle, and I am not a scout rifle sommelier. I'll be the first to admit that. I would consider myself as having a scout rifle, but many people that are scout rifle purists would say that I do not have anything close to a scout rifle. And there's a lot of debate even within the hardcore scout rifle community as to what a scout rifle is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of like men arguing what's the best football team. That's kind of like men sitting around that are scout rifle aficionados arguing whether something is or is not a scout rifle. They get that passionate and worked up about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, if you're listening to this, you probably like guns. And to take nothing away from Jeff Cooper, I hope to kind of, and no disrespect to Colonel Jeff Cooper, in fact, I really like his kind of concept of the scout rifle. But realize that this is Jeff Cooper, I don't believe, had any thoughts on a scout handgun. I'm going to take reasons I like the scout rifle concept and apply them to a handgun. So I'm going to outline it like this, realizing that these outlines and these parameters are purely arbitrary. But if I wanted a good all-around handgun suitable for defensive purposes if need be, escape and evasion if need be, and hunting, medium to large game if need be, to be able to do all that. Not great, just like the scout rifle. It's not the best defensive rifle, and it's not the best, big game hunting rifle. But it's a decent all-around rifle at reasonable distances. So when applying that to the handgun, what's a good all-around? It would be adequate for defense. It would be totally adequate for hunting medium to large game, or maybe even defense against large game. Just like the scout rifle, it might not necessarily need the biggest capacity or the fastest follow-up shots, but I think a reasonable rate of fire would also be a criteria of this. I love the Thompson Center Contender. It's really versatile, especially if you have like a 22 long rifle barrel and a 45-70 government barrel. But you kind of lose out on that reasonable rate of fire. So a good all-around handgun with a good reasonable rate of fire, capable of being used in, I would say, effective handgun ranges. And I know most people think that is 25 yards, but I'm going to push that out to 100, 150 yards. And this is not a purely defensive handgun. This is going to be a defensive, if need be, combat handgun. Also, a hunting, reconnoitering, out in the wilderness, scouting handgun. So, why might you want this handgun? Well, I was thinking about this today. In fact, this came up today, so I've been thinking about it. Thought experiment. What if you're in a non-permissive environment? What if you're in an environment where, say, martial law has been declared, and if you get caught walking around with a long gun, you're going to get, let's say, pleasantly relocated. If you have a big duffel bag or something, you're going to get searched. Or perhaps your things have gotten really bad and there's tribal warlords, as there are in most of the country and a lot of places where society has kind of regressed or gone back to that base state of tribalism, where there's warlords, where there's things like that. And whatever location you are in or have to go through or move through, they say, if we see you walking on the street with a long gun, you're going to get shot. Only their guys, only their armed people are the ones allowed to walk around with rifles and shotguns and things like that. Not just one example. There could be others. It could be on a long distance thing where your primary mission is not to engage with anything. You just want to cover a lot of ground. I don't care how fast you can move. If you reduce the amount of weight you carry, you can cover more ground. That's just a matter of fact. You can cover the same amount of ground in less time. A kid in your group or one of your kids, and again, it's a thought experiment, I hope this never happens, really needs antibiotics. They need it fast, and you have to cover a lot of ground overnight. You may not want to take a bunch of weight. You may want to take a handgun and that's it. You may find yourself on the wrong side of a handgun rifle fight. Anyway, for any number of reasons, you do your own thought experiments, but a good general purpose handgun. Capable in a defensive role. Doesn't have to be a concealed carry handgun. You could wear a big overcoat or something, or a jacket, and conceal a fairly large gun if you're moving through a non-permissive environment or something like that. Because I would argue that a concealed small compact or subcompact handgun is not a good all-around handgun. But one that's suitable for defense and hunting. And if I'm making up the rules, which I am, let's say 0 to 150 yards. You may think that's outside of handgun range, but I would say it's not. Plenty of really good handgun shooters can easily get hits on man-sized or deer-sized targets out to that distance from a standing position, let alone a prone position with the mag well driven hard into the ground. Anyway, those are the parameters and a reasonable rate of fire. So when I thought about this today, and I posed this question, the very first thing that came to mind was a 4 to 5 inch 357 Magnum revolver. 357 Magnum is known for being one of the best stopping power rounds for a handgun, period. Right? It's kind of legendary in that role of effective stopping power in a handgun. At 357, 125 grain, jacketed hollow point, especially out of a 4 or 5 inch barrel, that is a lot of power. The 357 is also known for a great hunting round. Now, a lot of people today will think you need a 454 Gasul or a 500 Smith & Wesson or something crazy, but you have to remember, before the 44 mag came out, the 357 was the thing to hunt large game with, and plenty of big game, I would submit to you, has been taken from deer to elk to bear with a 357, so I would say it's perfectly adequate. And the 357/38 Special, if you don't know, a 357 Magnum revolver can fire 38 Special, is quite flexible. I already talked about a good defensive round. You could also get 180 grain hard cast lead semi-wad cutters. It would be great for defense against, let's say, harder targets, whether that's a big-bodied bear. Is it as good as a 454 Gasul? No, but this is an all-around handgun. This is not the best, grizzly bear defense handguns. It's something that you could use. A good non-expanding hard cast 180 grain 357 is a fine choice for that. Likewise, you can scale it down if you wanted to hunt smaller game, grouse and things like that. You could get, let's say, the classic 148 grain lead semi-wad cutter loaded to mild. It's going to be quite a bit quieter. That may have its own advantages. They're known for being ridiculously accurate. And they're probably not going to tear your meat up if you shoot, say, a spruce grouse out of a tree at 5 yards. There's also shot shells for revolver rounds that I don't know how effective they are, but they certainly would be good for really up-close small game. Very small birds, rats, things like that. Because if this is your all-around handgun, maybe you need to protect whatever food you have from critters. There's a lot of utility and a lot of flexibility in the 357/38 Special. There's a lot more than that. Those are just some go-to loads. Now, Those almost certainly are not going to shoot the same point of aim, point of impact, but if this is your like one go-to handgun for pretty much all around, you're probably going to know. Have your hardcore defensive or hunting load, maybe it's the same load. Maybe you decide you want a 158 grain soft point for both. You're going to have your other loads, and you're going to pretty much know that at 5 yards it makes no difference, and at 10 yards I have to aim an inch low or whatever it is. You're going to know that for your gun, right? But that was my first thought. I'd say a stainless steel. Smith & Wesson comes to mind. K-frame, L-frame, something like that. 357 Magnum, a 686 or a 686 plus, 7 rounds of 357. 4-inch or 5-inch. Not crazy long, not like a super long barrel or anything. You may still have to conceal it, but I think that's a good all-around gun. And I have done, by God's grace, more handgun hunting than a lot of people. And I've taken a lot of animals, and I would have no problem hunting North American big game with a 357 Magnum with proper ammo selection and reasonable ranges. That was my first thought. Then I had another one. The runner-up thought that I had for this thought experiment is a 1911 in 10mm. If there is another great dual-purpose round for medium to large game hunting and defensive use, it is the 10mm, right? I think we can kind of agree on that. Now, you don't get as much flexibility in a semi-auto with ammo selection because you need a certain set of parameters, right? Too high a velocity, too much energy, you're going to mess up the gun, and too little, and the gun's not going to cycle and cause a malfunction, both of which are bad. So you can't go as hot or as down. There's not as big a spectrum you can load to as you can with a revolver. But that being said, 10mm is certainly that kind of dual-purpose round. Nobody's going to argue that 10mm is not good for, deer hunting and things like that. It certainly is that. Nobody's going to argue that it's not adequate for self-defense. Is it as good as 9mm? I'd say probably not, because you're going to lose shot-to-shot recovery time. But remember, just like the Scout rifle, it's not about having the biggest capacity, fastest shooting gun. That will be what's the best combat handgun. This is the best all around. A 1911 with 10 rounds of 10mm, that's quite a bit of firepower, and the rate of fire is not slow by any means. And you can also hunt game with it. You could also use it for bear defense, things like that. It's a good all-around gun. If it were me and I was doing it, I would cut the top of the slide for an optic and mount an optic, a Trijicon or a Mara, the kind that doesn't take batteries. If this was my Hard Times do-it-all gun, I think that would be a fantastic choice. I'd probably go with a Colt Delta Elite because they've been around a long time and they have the reputation. But any really good, top quality 10mm 1911 would do the trick. I think that would be a good runner-up. You have the advantage of being semi-auto and box magazine fed. Again, you have the disadvantage of the less flexible ammo. Another really intriguing one, and kind of the one that I have, I guess, and I have hunted with successfully, it's actually my go-to carry gun. I normally carry it a 9mm, but I also have a 357 SIG barrel for it, and I have hunted with it. But let's say the 357 SIG in most common handguns, mine is a single action only SIG P226 with an optic. That would be a great choice. I don't think it would be the best choice because I own it and that's what I run. I would not consider that the best all-around handgun. I certainly know that it works for hunting because I've done it. Anyway, the 357 SIG in pretty much any full-size handgun that you want, the 357 SIG would be a good choice. If you can find one of the older Smith & Wesson M&Ps chambered in the 357 SIG, that would be a sweet gun to have for that role. Get kind of that 1911 ergonomics, get the power of the 357 SIG. It's a good manageable size. It's a stainless steel slide, even if it's painted black, it's stainless steel underneath there. They've got beefy, robust extractors. A Smith & Wesson M&P, or really any, take your pick of 357 SIG handguns. Kind of the cool guy one, really expensive high-end one that I thought of that would be really awesome. Though it might get knocked out of the running because the ammo is not common. As I understand, that's a big reason why scout rifles are generally in 308 is the ammo is super common. This ammo is not super common. So that might knock it out of the running. But it's certainly a good all-purpose, so I'm going to mention it anyway. If you guys listen, you know when I was the commander of a tactical team, you know that I ran STIs. I really like the STI. Now they're staccato. I was running them long before they were staccato. I don't own any staccatos. All mine are older STIs. Anyway, it's a double stack, modular, polymer frame, 1911 made to really good quality. Well, since it already has the frame and everything cut out to 45 ACP length, there is a cartridge called the 9x23 Win Mag. Yes, it's a 9mm Magnum, literally. And if you look at the ballistics, it is really, really respectable, especially out of a full-size, you're talking about a 5-inch barrel STI, which is a 1911 derivative, and 9x23 Win Mag. Again, it's not going to be as flexible as a 357 Magnum because you can't load it down and have it cycle reliably. But that will be a good dual-purpose round. The 9x23 would be an awesome round. I don't know if I've done an episode on that on Better Know a Cartridge. If I haven't, I probably should. It's an awesome cartridge, and it easily fits in that length it would fit into an STI. So you'd get the same magazine capacity, 26 rounds of 9mm Win Mag. That's a formidable fighting force. You're kind of tipping the scales. You're not giving up any capacity with that thing. It's more than most modern handguns. It's more than most Glocks are going to have. That's a lot of firepower. That's a lot of rounds of a really hot round. If the load is right and your penetration and expansion thresholds are all good, it would be a fine medium to large game hunting round, I think, as well. Because the energy, if you look at it, it's pretty close to a 357. I know it's not exactly. Don't get mad at me. I know there's differences. But it's certainly adequate. Anyway, that would be a really cool choice for this kind of concept. Another one that I think really deserves a look is the 44 Magnum. The 44 Mag, it's certainly the best one we've talked about thus far for large game hunting and bear defense and things like that round for round. It certainly has that going for it. It is a powerhouse, especially with the proper loads. Even with a standard load, even the standard load of, what is it, if my numbers are correct, 240 grain bullet at 1400 feet a second, that is by far more powerful than the other things we've talked about today. So it certainly gets the nod for big game hunting, bear defense. In fact, a lot of people use it for that. My father, in fact, growing up, that's the only thing I ever remember him hunting deer with. He may have used a shotgun with buckshot from time to time, but it was generally a stainless steel Ruger Red Hawk or Ruger Super Red Hawk in 44 Mag. It certainly does that. The issue is you're getting into the point of, that's a big, heavy gun. And most of them are. I believe it's the Smith 629 is a super lightweight. And that might be the exception. That's a good gun. But it's kind of on the heavy end, but it is certainly a great round. And it certainly would do that. It would certainly work for defense. I think it's a little bit on the scale of diminishing return. I don't know if your rate of fire is actually going to be reasonable with a 44 Mag. Are you going to be able to run an El Prez drill with a 44 Mag and have the time be anywhere near reasonable? Assuming your reloads are good, I think you could do that fairly well with a 357. 44 Mag's got quite a bit of recoil in the lighter frame guns. The Smith & Wesson, I mentioned the 629, they also make the 5-shot based on the smaller frame, and it might be the Model 66, maybe the Model 69 Combat Masterpiece. That's a great name. I think it's one of those two models. That would certainly be light and handy, but the recoil on that is going to be stout. You could certainly get a gun that doesn't recoil that bad because it's in a big, heavy, full-framed gun, like the Ruger Red Hawk or Super Red Hawk, but that's a big, heavy gun. A lot of guys that hunt with those hunt with them slung across their chest because they're so big and heavy. Well, I don't know on that one. I think it's certainly, I guess it does fill this purpose. If we're going to go on that spectrum, it's certainly much more on the hunting and dangerous game defensive round than it is like a combat handgun round. But it certainly would be adequate, if not slow. Anyway, you got your standard, 240 grain. That would work good for just about anything. If you're talking about really big bear, you might want to think about some heavier 300 and something grain hard cast lead. And just like the 357 Magnum will shoot 38 Special, you could also shoot the 44 Special. Now, I don't think it's quite the same because 44 Special is by no means anywhere near as common as 38 Special is. But it does exist. It is around. And if I'm going to talk about that 9x23, we can certainly talk about the 44 Special. So maybe somebody out there would have a good time running an El Pres drill with a 44 Special, especially out of a full-size 44 mag handgun. But then you start asking yourself, if you're going to carry it with 44 Special for most of the time for defense, is it really any better than the 357? And I don't know. You'd have to answer that for yourself. Again, this is kind of a thought experiment, but I certainly couldn't go without mentioning it. And if there are shot capsules for the 357 Magnum 38 Special that are effective, I have to imagine that the 44 Magnum shot shells are going to be even more effective because they're bigger and they have more shot. They may actually be suitable for like a grouse or a dove or something like that. Anyway, it's a really cool idea. I think it's worth thinking about. It's worth kind of considering what is the best all-around handgun for not just defense, but for defense and medium to large game hunting and maybe dangerous game defense. Something that would fill all those roles and have a reasonable rate of fire. I think that is a pretty cool thought experiment. Hopefully you enjoyed that thought experiment with me. If you have different choices, if you think the whole concept is ridiculous, either one, whatever yours would be, you can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com, goodshepherdtraining.com. Tactical tip of the day, dummy cord. I was thinking about this the other day. I guess a lot of civilians don't generally do this. It's called a dummy cord, so if you drop it, you don't lose it like a dummy. But let's say my go-to knife on my baby bug-out bag, on my bailout bag, it has got a really sturdy clip on there on the sheath, but the sheath is also dummy corded in case for some reason the clip should come off. It won't fall out and get lost forever. The dummy cord, right? Do this in the military a lot. Not only will you molly something, but if it's something expensive, like NVGs or something like that, you'll also probably take a piece of 550 cord and tie that pouch hard onto your molly. That way it doesn't get snapped off jumping out of the back of a deuce and a half or a 7-ton or something like that and get lost. Dummy cording, it's a thing. Have some crucial piece of kit on your war belt, on your bug out bag, on something like that. You may want to think about going back and taking some kind of cordage. Zip ties work really well for this sometimes, and giving some redundancy to the retention on those items. Anyway, that is your tactical tip of the day. Hopefully the moment you've all been waiting for, the tactical verse of the day. Proverbs 10. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. Reminds me of another very good verse. Seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. So remember to be fair, honest, and humble, and try and strive for that in life and all things. Shooting is no different. If it's an X-ring hit, be honest about that. Thank God for the talent he's given you. If it's a miss, be honest about that. And whether you do really good or not, you should always be humble because whatever you have, God gave it to you. If you're good at a skill, at a discipline, shooting, at playing the guitar, God gave you that ability. You couldn't draw a single breath without him. So whatever you have, remember it's a gift from the Most High, from the Almighty God. He is the source of all good things. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day. Hey audience, postscript or post audio. I think I misspoke, remembered the model wrong. I do believe the model of that lightweight scandium frame 44 mag that Smith & Wesson makes is the 329 PD.